My name's Dom Morley. I'm producer, engineer, mixer, educator at times. I won a Grammy for the Amy Winehouse album Back to Black. I'm currently working on an EP for a singer-songwriter called Lloyd Llewellyn. I recently had a #1 in France with Ibrahim Maalouf album called Sens. Yeah, so my studio is in the countryside. It's in what I like to call Tolkien territory because the writer J.R.R. Tolkien lived and grew up around here. So it's in the middle of nowhere. It's very, very quiet. I'm surrounded by chickens and horses and lakes, and there's really no people or cars around. So the big advantage from a studio owner's point of view is I didn't have to soundproof the building because there's nothing to proof myself against. There is no sound outside. And also it's people like coming here because it's green and lovely, and particularly in the summer it's glorious, and it's a nice break, and it's only about 40 minutes from London, so you can leave London, you can drive out here and you're just in the middle of the countryside for a day, do some recording, make a record, and then you can quite easily get back home to London. So yeah, it works quite well being out here. So when I record, I do most of my recording in here, but if I have drums or strings, I need a bigger room, and particularly with drums, I need to be very noisy. So I go to, normally there's a couple of studios in London that I like because they have API desks. I like APIs for drums. So there's Rack Studios in St John's Wood, or Core Studios, which is in Acton, and they both have APIs. So I use those two when I need to. Otherwise, I do everything in here because obviously I'm quite well covered for synths. I have some guitar gear, I've got an amp and some pedals, and in my back room I've got the cab, so I can record guitars quite nicely in here with the guitar sat next to me. I've got space to do vocals, I've got a lovely Yamaha upright piano, and a few other keyboards and stuff, so I can record everything else in here. And I don't have a booth very deliberately because I really like being in the same room as the performer and us having the same space. You know, as a producer, I find that really important, that we're not separated by a sheet of glass and a strange intercom system. You know, when we get to the end of a take, we just take our headphones off and then we chat about that take and discuss what we can do for the next take. And it's a lot more natural and a personal approach. So that's why I didn't put a booth in here, because I didn't want that. I want to be next to the singer when they're singing. Well, I've done 4 albums for this trumpet player called Ibrahim Maalouf. He's a quarter-tone player, born in Lebanon, grew up in France, and lives in Paris. And we've never actually met. We just communicate mostly by WhatsApp, actually, WhatsApp and email. And there was an album that I did for him. I think it was a 3rd project I did for him, which was a gig of an arena gig that he did in Paris, 17,000 people or something like that. And I didn't actually know the size of the gig. When it arrived, he just said, I did a gig, we've recorded it, can you mix it? So I said, yeah, fine. And then 0.5 terabyte of information arrived on a hard drive, and I realized it was probably quite large. And then when I finally saw the pictures, I realized it was an arena gig. I didn't know the size of the gig at all. So it was in the Bercy Arena in Paris. And he played for nearly 3 hours and had 160 something mics, I think, on stage. There was an orchestra and an extra brass section and a couple of choirs at one point, and full band and Ibrahim, and then there were some people that came on stage at one point from the crowd, and it was a brilliant gig, absolute madness. But yeah, it was enormous, and I had to buy a whole load of extra 64 gig of RAM for my computer in order to actually run the session. But it was great, it all ran. I managed to get the whole gig in one session so that I could jump around the songs and make changes all along, because he was obviously never going to come here because he's busy working in Paris and I'm here in Oxfordshire in England. So it was possible to just communicate and me quickly jump to a song and say, yeah, here's these changes that you want, and jump to another one, here's these changes you want. And yeah, did the whole gig in stereo and then took it to somewhere else because I don't have a 5.1 facility here at the moment. Took it to another studio in Oxfordshire and did a 5.1 version of the whole mix as well. So it's on DVD and there's an album of it and so on. No, it was all really well recorded, and that's the one, you know, when you're mixing, that's what makes a difference. It was really well recorded, so it's easy to get the right sounds and the sounds that you want because it's all been done well and all the frequencies are still there, you know. And there's it's always difficult with live. I've mixed quite a lot of live things. Like you might have seen one of the discs on my wall. I mixed some of the Live 8 concerts, the Paris, Berlin and Rome ones. And so when you're mixing live things, there's obviously separation goes out the window a little bit, but there's certain things you can do to make it better, and they certainly did that. Like the drummer had a Perspex screen up around him, so there wasn't too much bleed from the drummer onto the clarinet player and the violin player and things like that, where, you know, those quieter instruments can really get crushed by a drum kit being next to them. But they did quite a good job of separating things out, considering there was so many people on one stage. I'm running Pro Tools, and I sum everything through a Neve line mixer, and then I have 16 hardware inserts and Pro Tools via one of those interfaces. So I mix out of the Burls, and then the Avid is doing the inserts, and that's where I put my hardware. So I'll have on Pro Tools, I'll have plugins that are hardware, one of the things behind me, or it will be a normal plugin. So it's kind of a semi in the box, semi out of the box, because I'm processing stuff through hardware, but I'm doing all the automation in the box, and then it's coming out to be summed via the Neve summing mixer. So it's a bit of a combination of the two, really. Which is broken, and I haven't fixed it because I use the PSP one all the time. It's been broken for about a year. I have to get around to fixing it, really, but the PSP one sounds really good. So I remember when you first brought it out, I think you must have Googled and found that it was on my studio list, and so you sent it to me and said, how does this compare to your one? And I think I sent back, well, my one's noisier, but apart from that, it sounds the same. It really does sound very good, the PSP version of it. So yeah, it's great, and I will get it fixed at some point soon, but at the moment I just use yours because it's good. A bit, not a lot. I like it if a compressor's got a mix control. I do use that a little bit. I'm kind of used to, I've always, when I started out, that would have been another channel on the desk that you used up, which you might not have had spare. So I sort of learnt how to do it without using the two channels on the desk. I've always done it with drums. I've always had a kind of parallel compression thing going on the drums, where you've got the normal drum track with the bit of compression to hold it and to glue it, and then you've got a completely smashed one that you just kind of edge a little bit in. So I've always done a little bit of that with drums, but it's not something I do with a lot of things, because I do quite like the sound of things being properly held by a compressor. And if you know what you're doing with it and can do it well, then you don't need the parallel so much to give it life, you know, to get the life in there as well. Sometimes, yeah, it's not an every time, and it's not a never. It's just I kind of might use them to do different things. Like you might use an 1176 kind of thing, like a FET one, to kind of make the thing a bit snappier, and then maybe something like an LA2E kind of one to just get the peaks and do a bit of limiting on the peaks. So sometimes do a little bit of that, or it might be use a DBX kind of one, because I really like what those do to bottom end, but then want to hold it a bit harder with something else afterwards. So yeah, it just depends what I'm doing. So what I've got actually 5 different monitoring systems that I use. I suppose I've got 6 because I've got this little radio up here, which I don't really use very often, but I just occasionally flick it on to see, can you hear the bass on the radio, you know. So my main ones are these Neumanns, which are the 310s, and they sound amazing. I was actually, when I went to get a new pair, I had these KRK V8s, and then they stopped making the cones, so I knew I had to get something different because I couldn't get those anymore. So I went to KMR, which is a really good shop in North London that sells gear, and they set me up a load of different speakers. I told them what my budget was and what I was used to and things like that, and they set me up about 4 different speakers, and then those as well, which are a little bit above my budget. And then they said, here you go, listen to these, but also just check these out as well because you might like them. And the difference was amazing. I absolutely loved it. I listened to a few things that my sort of my ideas for reference are you should always have something that you've just worked on because you know exactly what it sounds like, and then have something that you have listened to for years and years and years. So I brought a project I was mixing and Fleetwood Mac's Rumours, because my parents were huge into that when it came out when I was 2, and so I've heard that album for my whole life because I like it as well. And then the trick really is to find a pair of speakers that will give you something you haven't heard before. So you notice something new with that pair of speakers, which means they're giving you more detail than you're used to. So the Neumanns did that. Absolutely, there was all sorts of stuff I was hearing that was like, oh wow, I've never heard that, that's fantastic. So bought those immediately, even though it was 20% over my budget. NS10s, I've just had them for years, and I'm just really, for me it's really fast doing vocal rides on NS10s. I just know where it should be on an NS10 very easily, so it's just quick for me to jump onto NS10s and do that. I do have a sub with it, I've got a KRK sub with it, so I quite like that. It's a better sound, you know, with that. So NS10s I use for that a lot. I'll also check the mix thoroughly on NS10s because it gives you a lot of that mid-range stuff where your snare and your vocal and your lead guitar and your saxophone and all those things are all in that mid-range where NS10s are quite prominent, which makes them sound harsh but also gives you a lot of detail in that particular sector of the frequency range. The Avantones I got relatively recently. So I use them a bit, and it's only really at the moment I'm using them to judge balance on kind of low-level radio TV sort of stuff. So I'm not really EQing on them because for me I'm not used to them enough, and I think they're potentially a bit too small for that, but who knows, I might get into that when I'm more used to them. And I also have 2 pairs of headphones that I use a lot. I use Grado 325s, which sound really, really good, and I've recently got these Focal Clear Professionals. I had to check the name because they're quite new for me, which also sound amazing. So it's quite good having the 2. For me, it's a bit like having NS10s and Neumanns. If I've got the Grados and the Focals, I know I've got a really good range between the 2 of them. They cover a lot because I'm traveling quite a lot at the moment with work, and it's good to have both. If I've got both of those in my bag, and I have this, can't quite see it there, but Chord do something called a Hugo 2, which is a digital to analog converter, and it sounds really good. So I take that and my 2 pairs of headphones, they all go with me traveling, and I know wherever I am in the world, I can plug that into my laptop, and I've got studio level quality monitoring. So that's a huge bonus, because I do this mix consultancy thing, which maybe we'll talk about later, but that involves me being able to, I need to be able to get feedback to people quickly. So wherever I am, I can't necessarily come back to the studio. If I'm in New York, then I'll just get those on. I know exactly what they sound like, and I can give people some really good feedback on mixes very quickly where I am, and I know it's good. No, I've got a small, I think it's only like 24-inch screen or something like that, and I've often thought I should upgrade it, and you know, they're cheap as well, but I resent spending money on looking at audio. You know, I'd rather spend the 250 quid and put it towards a nice compressor or buy some plugins that make my stuff sound better, rather than just looking at the thing more. So I sort of fool myself, maybe it's right, but I sort of tell myself that I'll listen harder if I can see less. So I've still got a small screen. I make sure they don't go red. That's about it. That's fine by me. I'm not mastering, you know, so I will make sure that the final mix is delivered to, you know, within a few dB of the headroom, and it won't go over. And then my mastering engineer deals with the rest of that and worries about the loudness and things. So I'm just mixing. So long as I'm not hitting the red and there's no noise going on, you know, we're all good. Quite a lot of, it's not always up to me. Sometimes, you know, the artist has someone who they particularly want to work with, or the label or something like that. But most of the time I use a guy called Miles Scholl, who works out of Abbey Road, who I've known for 20 years. He actually, the first UB40 album that I worked on when I was a brand new assistant, the first job I had, he mastered that album. And so I knew him from then. And then when I got a job at Metropolis, he was at Metropolis. So we sort of knew each other quite well there. And then he's since gone to Abbey Road, and I've used him for a lot of stuff since he's gone there. So he, as I said, the stuff that I tend to get is something that wants to sound natural and organic and warm, and that's what he does as a mastering engineer as well. I feel that's kind of his territory too. He's certainly one of those things where you're always a bit nervous when you go to mastering about whether it's going to come out better, but I'm not with Miles. I know it will always come out how I imagined it to sound, but a little bit better, which is perfect. That's all you want. I send whatever and I figure it's his job. I make it sound as good as possible. It tends to peak about -1, -2 on my metering, -3 maybe on the Pro Tools meters, so it's not going into the red, and he deals with everything else. I worry about the mix and he worries about the loudness. That's the job division. For me, in case I can learn something, about what he does to my mix, and then I can learn something about what I can do better next time. But he's never had any serious work to do with him. It's normally just like a dB of EQ here and there, and a little bit of compression. He's got this wonderful, there's a company called Analog Tube that remake the old Fairchild 670 compressors, but remake them in such a precise way, and it's all hand-wired, discrete components. It's an incredible compressor, and Miles has got one of those, so normally stuff goes through there as well. So it goes through that, and then a little bit of limiting to bring it up in level without squashing it. And yeah, there's never much to do, and he's never had to ask me for something different. So I guess we work together well in that respect. You can always find me on dommorley.com, so that's easy, and themixconsultancy.com as well. So, find me on either one.